Hi everyone, Polly from Team Element here. I'm going to be doing a video today on the second series of the crafting guide, and this is going to be for the blue cards. So we're going to talk today about all the different blue cards, the main mechanics and the popular kind of play styles with the blue deck, so you guys can get an idea of whether you want to start crafting some blue cards, and if the kind of mechanics don't appeal to you, then it might you might end up deciding you want to craft some of the different coloured cards. So we're going to go through the blue cards today and discuss some of the main important cards and what kind of playstyle people are playing with blue at the moment. So first, if you start when you've bought the game, there are some solo missions that you can unlock some of the blue cards here. So if you complete these 3 solo blue missions here, you can get some extra cards from the codex, which is really important. So I definitely suggest completing the blue missions so you've got some extra blue cards just to see the range of cards you can get. So the codex cards here, you can see for blue, there's a couple of main mechanics with blue. The first mechanic is aquatic. So what that means is you can step off a tile, so step off a land you've created into the ocean or the empty tiles. So anything with aquatic can step off a land into the ocean and move around freely there. It does however mean that if you are an aquatic creature, that it cannot step on a neutral land or a red, yellow or green land. So that's one thing to bear in mind. And the main other mechanic that the blue cards have is this mechanic that says here, you can see it says jump. So jump means it can hop 2 squares, and it can hop over creatures, it can hop over either enemy or friendly creatures, and it does give you like a lot of mobility. So aquatic jump here means this creature can jump 2 squares, and it can only jump into the sea or onto other aquatic tiles. So we're going to go through the main the blue cards here and give you guys a feel of what kind of decks people are running with blue. So the main decks people are running at the moment with blue are decks that include lots of events. So I think I've got an example here that I can show you here. So here is some blue cards here that I can talk about. This event style deck. And how this deck works is, in blue there are a lot of events. So in this game, events are the same as the word for spells. So as you can see in this deck, any card with a kind of flick at the top here is a spell, or in this game it's called an event. And you can see here, as it's flat, this is just a creature. So in blue events, people are generally playing lots of spells. So as you can see here, we've got Spell Whirl, Shifting Tides, Unbound Evolution, Humbling Vision, Battletoads, Frogify, and they're using these events to buff creatures such as this Aurora's Disciple here, or this fairy here. So Aurora's Disciple gains 1+1/+1 when you play any events, and Snowstorm Lancer gains attack buff here. And similarly, the Darkstalker, its cost is reduced when you play events. So this is the synergy of the deck, playing lots and lots of spells and trying to defeat your opponent playing few creatures but lots of events. So I'm just going to talk through some of the main cards here. So initially I'm going to talk through some of the strong cards and what cards people are using in most decks. So Spell Whirl is a very popular blue card here, and it allows you for 0 Faria and with 2 blue lands to add 2 random blue cards to your hand, which can be very good in buffing your event creatures, or just gaining 2 cards for 0 cost is obviously quite good. Shifting Tides is a very common card that's in a lot of the blue decks, and it allows you to either move a land, which is also another one of the blue mechanics, or draw a card. And drawing cards in any card game is good in every deck, because you can draw into, you can kind of filter your deck down and draw into the cards you want more. And the moving the land is very helpful with blue, especially because of the jump creatures. So for example, if you had a Triton Diver here, you could move the land it's on and allow it to jump into a better position and get a favourable trade or gather some Faeria. So that's why the land movement is also quite strong in blue. Okay, so I'm just going to go through and I'm going to mention some of the main cards that people are playing and the strength of the cards. So most decks are running this Spell Wall here, and it's a fairly cheap card here. It's only a rare, so it's not very expensive. Shifting Tides is a very popular card here in most blue decks. It is only a common, so it's very cheap to craft, and it can draw into more cards or move lands to give you better positions on the board. Triton Sanctuary is a popular card in more controlling style blue decks. As you gain more Faeria, you can destroy this and kind of get a Faeria boost. So some decks are running this, not very many, so I wouldn't suggest crafting this unless you have a good idea of what kind of blue stuff you want to create. So some decks are running Sunken Towers to move lands, but not that many, so I wouldn't recommend crafting this card unless you really enjoy moving lands and you want to create a deck around this kind of card. These are good cards in the blue selection. So the Fairies are very popular because when you draw an event, so when you draw a spell, which are obviously very common in the blue decks, this Fairy gets a buff and it gains protection and charge. So Fairy and spells are very common in the same decks. It is a legendary card, so it does cost like 80 crystals to create, but it is very popular in the spell style decks. So it's worth thinking about if you're really interested in creating a event deck. Triton Chef is also a very strong card that gives you a Triton Banquet, which is this card here, which allows you to give a creature +1/+1 protection, which is like a bubble that protects you from one attack, and jump. So that's why Triton Chef is quite popular as a gatherer, but it is very expensive to craft, so it's something to think about there. Unbound Evolution has an interesting role in the blue decks, so you can use it to either transform one of your creatures into a more powerful one if it runs low on HP, or if you want to see if you can gain a stronger creature to trade. And it can also be used as a removal tool. You can use it on an opponent creature, and even though you're evolving it into a more Faeria, a creature with more Faeria, it can remove creatures that have Death Touch or Taunt or are just buffed up a lot. So a creature that's got a lot of buffs, you can remove it by evolving it. So it's a very versatile card, but it is expensive to craft. Darkstalker is a cheap card that is running quite a lot of like mid-range event decks, and this card is only costs you 1 Faeria if you've played a spell that turn. And as there are a lot of spells in the blue deck, this card can be quite cheap. It can only cost you 1 Faeria, which is obviously good for a 3/2, and it's a common card, so it's cheap to craft. So a lot of decks with a lot of spells are running these Darkstalkers, so this is a fairly strong card in those kind of decks. Ludwan is a creature that is like a gathering creature that gives you a random blue card that's 2 Faeria cheaper if you gather from an opponent well. And I've seen some decks playing this, but it is more of a specialised card and it is very expensive, so it isn't a must or an overpowered card. But some decks are running this card. Mythic Beast is a card that not many decks are running this at the moment, as your opponent has to have over 10 Faeria for it to get the buff, so not a popular card at the moment. The Triton Diver is a fairly strong gatherer. It has jump and aquatic, so if you play it on turn 1 you can begin jumping it to double gather from one side of the board, while you build towards the other to gather off that side maybe. So it is a fairly good card, and it is a common. you get it with a codex, so it can be a good good card to start off your blue decks. The Aurora's Disciple is another good card if you play a lot of spells. I think it gains the buffs, and it is a common card, so you can craft this for cheap. So it does fit nicely in a deck with lots of spells in, and it is one of the main kind of damage dealers or creatures in those decks. Gideon Commander is a fairly specialised card. It has aquatic, so it can move in the water, and it has charge 3, so it can move 3 squares at a time. But it has low health and can be fairly susceptible, and it's mainly used when people are trying to gather from opponent wells to summon the Wavestorm Colossus that costs less when you've gathered from enemy wells. So unless you have the 3 Colossus that are in your deck, Gabian Commander is quite weak with its 2 health, so it's only popular in decks where you need to gain mana from the other opponent's Faerie well. Humbling Vision is a fairly cheap card, and it is one of the types of removals that the blue decks have. So it reduces a creature's attack and life by half. So you can use that to trade into a card to get a favourable trade, your creature survive, or kill a creature that's very powerful with one of yours by reducing its cost. So this is a popular card and is used quite a lot. So it is a card that is definitely worth having at least one copy of if you're playing more of a controlling style for trading. Lore Thief is a really good blue card that is in most decks. It has the option of gaining 2+2 or drawing 2 cards. It's mainly used for the card draw here. So you get a Gatherer, which is can gather from wells, and it also so it's mainly used for card draw. So you can draw into more cards, draw into more spells, and draw into more useful cards. So most decks are running 2 or maybe 3 Lore Thieves. So this is a very strong card that is definitely worth picking up as your gatherer and card draw mechanic. So I'd definitely recommend it, as this is one of the really strong cards in the blue list for gathering. Prophet of Tides is a fairly specialised card, and it is more expensive than some of your cheaper gatherers, but you are able to move a land twice. All that means is you can pick one of the tiles you've created a land on, and you can move that land twice. You can't move 2 lands once each, so you can use this to position creatures more favourably, and it can be useful if you're using this creature along with a creature with jump. You normally move it like a water elemental, say, a bit closer to an enemy, so you can jump and trade with it onto your opponent's tiles, or so you can gather twice in a turn. But it is a fairly specialised card, and you don't see it run that much, mainly because Shifting Tides gives you the option of moving a land or drawing a card. It is cheaper, it does only cost 1 Faerie, and the 1/1 body isn't that significant. So this card isn't popular. Most people are running Shifting Tides instead of it. Spring Mochai is a strong card in more of a controlling deck. So what this means here is that any card that costs over 7 you would get for 2 Faerie cheaper. So if you're running a lot of large creatures, or anything that let me just go back, or any cards that cost over 7, it does reduce the Faerie count, and most decks use it as a gatherer. So it's a gatherer, and it reduces Faerie of some of your stronger cards. So in slower controlling decks, these you do find these being used. Water Elemental is an interesting card because it does allow you to create a lake, gain extra lands and board presence, and it does have jump. But not many decks are running much of the water elementals at the moment because of the jump mechanics and you're able to move lands. You don't necessarily need that many lakes, and not many decks are running many of these. Some might run 1 to gain an extra an extra well, maybe to get closer to one side of the board to gather, but it's a good card to start with if you want to play a blue deck and haven't got all the cards you need. So it is a codex card as well, So you can use this card, but it's not super popular at the moment. Aurora Mistmaker is one of the best cards, I'd say, in the blue list, but it is a legendary card. It does cost a lot of crystals to create, but you're able to buff another creature or change its life total to 6/6. So most people play maybe like a Lore Thief for the card gather, and then play the Aurora to buff a smaller creature like one of these, or a Mochi, or buff one of the toads it can summon. So it is very useful because of the small creatures in blue that can gather. Azure Wisp, people aren't running that much at the moment because it's not very strong for the cost, and the buff it gains from gathering isn't great at the moment. So I'd stay away from this card at the moment. It's not very strong. Battletoads is a solid card in the blue list. It's a common, so it's not that expensive to craft. It does count as an event as well. So you summon two frogs with jump that acts like basically the same as a Triton Diver. It's a 2/2, but it's not an aquatic creature. So people normally use these as gatherers, and because it summons two frogs, you can kind of maybe gather from both sides if you set it up early, and the event trigger can buff some of your event creatures. So it is just like a good card that most blue decks are running, like maybe one copy of this. Gabriel Archon is a card that some of the slower control decks are running if you're playing cards but you have over the cost of 7. So if you're running more of a controlling deck, they are mostly running this card, but it's not very useful in like the more mid-range and smaller creatures deck. And when you start the game, most of the codex cards don't have any big creatures in, so I'd stay away from crafting this unless you've got some bigger creatures you want to run, or more expensive spells you want to run. Gabriel Insistent is a card that's used in some really slow control decks to gain extra mana per turn, but I wouldn't recommend crafting this until you have like a larger collection and you've got. So some of the control decks you need a lot more of the cards to make the cards like this work effectively. Gabriel Enchantress, not a super popular card. You can change a creature's attack to become equal to its life, so it can work with other cards that have high HP and low attack. So people normally run this kind of card with. It's popular to run with a Living Willow that can a 1/7, so you can make that become a 7/7, but it's not super useful in the blue list because most of the cards have equal, like 2/2, 3/2, so you're not gaining much of a buff for this. Okay, Triton Warriors are one of the Codex cards, I'm pretty sure as well. Yep, and it's a solid 4/4 body for 4. It has jump, so it's a fairly solid creature for the cost, and you can't go too wrong with this creature. 4/4 for 4 is good, and it has jump, so you can get better trades, jump over creatures, gather twice, etc. So it's not a bad card when you're starting out. Ninja Toad is a card that's run quite a lot in blue decks. It is a common, so it's not super expensive to craft. It has jump and haste, and haste is really important because it means you can gather that turn and attack and move. So you can play this by a fairy or well, gather, jump to another well. You can gather twice in one turn with this card, for instance, and trade in. So this is a very popular card, and you can't go wrong with this as a form of removal, or you can even play it to gather on that turn, or aggressively you want to try and put some extra damage to face. So this is a good card for blue, so it's definitely worth having some of these in your arsenal. Aurora's Trick, not run very often. It does cost 5 aquatic lands, and most of the blue cards only cost up to about 3. So you don't see this very often, and it can be quite useless. So I wouldn't recommend crafting this straight away until you've had a lot of play with the blue deck and you feel that maybe one of these is needed, but the five late cost is very expensive, so you don't see this run very much. Okay, getting towards the end here now. I will try and speed up. I've noticed it has taken a bit longer than expected. The Tyrannix, I think this is a Codex card. Let me just check here. Yep, you do get some of these in the Codex. Solid creature, 5 cost, 4/6. It's not much to say. It's a solid creature. You can run this. Good life, fairly good attack for 5. Good mid-range creature. So if you're starting out, this is a good card to have. It's cheap, and it's a 4/6 body. The one of the main cards run in blue is a removal card. You can transform a creature into a 2/2 frog with jump. So it's mainly used to frogify a big creature into a less dangerous one that you can trade with and remove. So say you're playing against a green deck and they've summoned a big Grove Guardian that's a big creature with taunt, or another big green card, or this card that's very common. You use this to frogify it and remove it. So it's your main removal tool in blue. So this is definitely a card you want to be running if you're running just a blue deck and you're starting out. Snowstorm Lancer is a good card when you have a lot of spells. Spell Whirl, as you can use it to it gains attack every time you play a spell up to +6, so it can become a 9/5. You can use it to trade with bigger creatures if you've played some spells that turn. So this is a common card in decks with a lot of spells in. If you're not running many events or spell cards, then it's not as strong, but it's fairly strong for its cost, so it's not a terrible card. But you need to be running some event cards, some spell cards for it to become effective. We talked about Triton Banquet a little bit earlier. It's almost like a pseudo removal type card where you can buff a creature, give it +1/+1. Protection means it gains a bubble so it can survive one attack and it doesn't take any damage. So you can use this to go 2-for-1 with a creature, buff it up. It has the jump, so you can trade with the creature and surprise your opponent, and your creature will stay alive. So some decks are running one of this, but most of the time, if they are running it, they run in a Triton Chef that gives it the Banquet, so they don't have to use the extra card in the deck. So I wouldn't suggest crafting this. Even though it's more expensive, it is better just to get a Triton Chef and gain the Banquet from his gift. Okay, Aurora's Creation, Egg of Wonders. Aurora's Creation adds a copy of a creature to your hand, so you can copy a strong creature and it does cost less. Some of slow control decks are running this with big creatures, mainly big creatures such as blue-red creatures such as Arstrock Behemoth, copying this because it's a very big, very dangerous creature. Copying a Colossus, copying Beirut. So unless you've got some really big creatures, and a lot of them, it's not really worth running this card in your deck, and it's expensive. Egg of Wonders, really high variation card. When you draw a creature, Egg of Wonders becomes a copy of it. So when you're starting out with a Codex blue card and maybe a few others that you've got, it costs 5 Faria, and you might draw into, say, one of your smaller creatures next turn, and it can be fairly useless, and you can actually kind of put yourself in more of a disadvantage by playing this card. So I wouldn't recommend this until you've got a lot of really big creatures and you're playing a control deck. So I'd stay away from this card until you've got more of the collection. Ancient Herald is a good card running in a lot of the blue decks. Next creature with 5 or more life, you draw cost 2 Faria less. 6 Faria cost, it's a 5/5, it's a fairly big body for the blue deck, and any creature with 5 HP such as this one, it's going to be cost 2 less. So this is a strong card running a lot of the blue decks that have bigger creatures in. I'd stay away from Wavecrafter, kind of a very situational card that's not running many constructed decks, so I wouldn't worry about this card. Gabriel Monk is an interesting card that you can, the gift is you can summon a ruby fish on any aquatic tower you choose. So it's mainly run so you can summon a gatherer if you're running short on gatherers in your deck. don't see this card very often in many constructed decks. If they are running it, they're probably running one copy of it or not many. So it's an interesting card. So you can see, say if you're running, you can't afford to run many gatherers, you can use this to summon a gatherer, but not super popular. So I wouldn't run this unless you're really interested in the card and want to have a go with it. Tailor of the Old Turtle is a very strong blue event card that gives you 3 cards, and the cost of those cards are reduced by 3. So you can draw cards that cost 0, and this can buff up your Aurora's Disciple quite heavily. Depending on what you draw, it can buff up, or you can play your Dark Stalkers for a lot cheaper because you played a spell. Very strong card at the moment. And most decks are running 2 copies of this or 3. It did get a nerf, but it's still a very strong card. It is expensive, but it can be very, very strong in some event decks. Gabriel Warden gives a creature protection, similar to what Banquet does without the buff, the Trident Banquet. Not very popular in constructed. There's not a ton of blue cards that it's really efficient to give protection to. Not any super big cards that can trade. Not super popular, but it is a common card, and it is a common card. I'm just seeing if you would gain any. I don't know if you get this in the Codex cards or not at the moment, but not super popular, so I won't worry about this card too much. Mirror Phantasm works either as a removal or a buffing creature, where you can either buff a small creature to make it stronger, or you can use it on an enemy creature to almost kind of frogify it, but it does have better stats. So it kind of works similar to Unbound Evolution or Frogify, or it can be used as a buff. Not super popular, but some decks run a copy of this, but not super popular at the moment, so I wouldn't. It's much more efficient to really have a Frogify, or it is an expensive card, so not many decks are running a lot of this at the moment. So wouldn't worry about this card too much. Wave Crash Colossus is like a very strong card at the moment. A lot of people are running 3 copies of this in their deck. Each time you gather from an opponent's Faria Well, it reduces the cost by 1, and with the jump mechanics and the land movement mechanics and all the aquatic creatures, it's quite easy to get this down to a 4 Faria cost card. So it's a 4 cost card for a 7/7, and most decks are running this as their largest creature in the deck, as maybe a finisher or the big body at the end to really drive a win home. So in most decks are running 3 copies of this and using a lot of the creatures with mobility, like Ninja Toad, Battletoads, Triton Divers, or Shifting Tides to collect from an opponent's well and reduce the cost. So really strong card, definitely worth crafting some of these if you enjoy playing blue decks. And some of the last cards here, Beirut is a legendary card that transforms all adjacent lands into lakes. Can be really strong in an only blue deck. It's obviously a legendary, so it is an expensive card. Not super popular at the moment, as there's a lot of aggressive cards on the ladder, so it's a very late game card, control orientated. Some decks are running it, not super popular. I wouldn't worry about crafting this. It isn't crazy strong, and it's not an included in every deck, so I wouldn't suggest crafting this because it's so expensive at the moment. Wimford is played in a lot of control decks where it gives you extra mana, so you can kind of ramp up into some of your later game creatures. Not super popular unless you're playing control decks, really late game style decks with a lot of big creatures like Ice Rock Behemoth or Legendary Dragons or massive creatures. So not great in some of the more mid-range creatures you get when you get the Codex collection. So not super popular, very deck dependent, so I would steer away from this card until you've decided what kind of decks you really like. this dragon transforms all your creatures into creatures that cost 2 more, so you can evolve your creatures into stronger ones. It can backfire though, and you can get worse creatures. Not super popular, to be honest. Not many decks are running this, as it's very RNG related, and you could get some terrible creatures, for instance. So it's not as good as it sounds. There's a lot of creatures that cost 2 more that are not as good, and it can be very RNG based, so don't worry about crafting this card. Stormspawn is some copies in control decks, as you gain 10th area and draw a card when it dies, but mainly used in late game control decks. So if you're playing a very control oriented deck, some of these are run, maybe some decks are running these, not very many. Ancient Herald can reduce the cost of this. Not super popular, so I won't worry about this card too much. It's not that strong and it's not run that often. Dream, super late game card, 24th area. You draw 9 cards and they're all reduced to 0. In a super late game meta, this card would be very strong, but the deck's very aggressive at the moment, so it's not an amazing, crazily good card, and steer away from it. It's not strong and it's very expensive at the moment. And lastly, the 3 creatures at the bottom have some blue in them, obviously. Are epics. Apex Predator can be quite strong in a green-blue deck. It's quite popular. It gains attack and life equal to a creature. So say if you did copy a Stormspawn, for instance, this would become a 7/8. So this is a popular card in blue-green decks, and it's strong. So if you do enjoy playing blue-green, this card can be fairly strong. Eyestruck Behemoth is a strong card in late game control red and blue decks, and people normally use Aurora's Creation to copy this card, so you gain extra copies because it's very strong. But a super late game card, you need a specific control deck, so I wouldn't craft this card until you've got a lot more cards. Twinsoul Spirit, I've been playing around with this card a little bit. I found it is fairly strong. You can summon an adjacent, you basically get 2 copies of this card, and you can summon the second copy adjacent to any friendly creature. So you can summon this card on a lot of places of the map to gain you a lot of mobility, and I found it is quite strong. Not very popular, but I found that in the right deck this can be quite a strong card, but you need a specific deck, and it's normally the bottom of your curve, so it'd be one of your last creatures mainly. But I won't worry about this card because you do need yellow cards to make it work until you've got a lot more cards. Has been a really lengthy video. I hope if I've gone any quicker, I would have kind of gone over some cards that maybe need a bit more attention. So hope you've enjoyed the video, and I'm going to release 3 more parts on green, red and yellow decks also. So if you have enjoyed the video, feel free to follow. Leave me any comments, would be greatly appreciated on if you found it useful, if there's anything I've missed that you'd like to see. So thanks for watching, guys. Going to release other free videos fairly soon. So thanks for watching. Comments below would be great. Subscribe, follow would also be great. Thanks for watching. Peace.